as we live in challenging times, it's requiring us to kind of figure out a new way of doing business. And in days gone pre-COVID, people might have discovered you and your nonprofit. Perhaps they would meet you at a fundraiser, or perhaps a community event, or maybe they would show up literally at the front door of your organization if you have a physical address. And all of that's kind of out the door right now. And what we're discovering over these last weeks is that people, what they're going to learn about you, they're going to learn about you from your online presence. And that is going to be a big challenge for so many of you, is to make sure that your online presence is up to date and contemporary and matches who you are. I know if I walk up to the front of a facility, I'm already making determinations about that organization or business as I'm approaching it. And I think a lot of you know, I work a lot with churches. And one of the things they say is people will make up their mind whether or not they're going to like a church when they visit, before they ever enter into the actual sanctuary or auditorium. They're making their determination as they come up. So having a great online presence is probably more critical now than ever before. And so we at Simon Cross, matter of fact, we had a website that was developed about 2 years ago, and which isn't ancient history, but sometimes in online world, it's a long time. And we just had ours redone. And we want to stay contemporary. And so we're taking this time today. We're going to have some Q&A from Chris is going to kind of present some things, but we're going to do a little bit of Q&A in here as well, so that you can have your opportunity to ask some specific questions and kind of get some guidance. But I've looked at a lot of nonprofit websites. I've looked at everybody who registered for this one. I've looked at all of yours. Some are really good, and hopefully you'll gain some little pointers today that'll help you in your online presence, which is more than just a website. But some of yours kind of lead me to believe I'm not getting the full story of who you are and what you could be. And that's why we want to provide you this opportunity to learn a little bit more. So I'm going to have Chris come on the line. He's going to introduce himself to you, and you're going to get a little bit of a feel for what he does, a very unique type of marketing called story branding. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Welcome, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Chris, creative director and founder at Wooden Bridge Media. And what I do is I work with businesses and organizations to help them develop a branding blueprint. And a lot of branding, and we use the word branding, and don't get that confused for a business. I mean, an organization, a nonprofit, a church, every entity needs branding. So we use that term, but I don't want you to think that it's a strictly business term. It's really, how are you presenting yourself to others? And so obviously a huge part of that is the online component. And now more than ever, obviously, I mean, everybody's doing meetings via Zoom. You know, in a time like this, how are you bringing people to your organization, and how are you sharing your story if you can't go out into the world and share that? And so when we talk about online presence, that's really what we mean. And I guess before we really get into it, the big thing to define is what does online presence mean, right? And so it means a lot, but it simplifies down into one really simple phrase that we'll get to. But online presence is anything that you're using online to reach your target audience and to share your story. And so obviously a website is the primary point you hope to do that through, but there's a lot of other avenues that you want to incorporate. A website on its own isn't necessarily going to do what you want it to do. You should be using social media, email campaigns. Obviously now Zoom is a huge part of an online presence, but really anything that drives people online to engage with your organization or your brand. And so let's start with the basics, and that would be a website. That's we're talking about online presence being your new front door. Well, your website is going to be your home. It's the home that you're inviting people into. And so I have taken a look at some of the websites from those of you who registered. I was able to get the registration list and look through. And just off of my initial browse through some of them, I can say there's definitely, some areas that I would encourage all of us to look more seriously at moving forward, especially as you're hoping more and more people begin to connect with you online. And so really, when we're talking about your website, it's your first impression. Right now, it's your only impression. You're not meeting people. Hopefully, you're not meeting too many people out on the streets in businesses right now. This is your only impression that you're making. So make it count. And so how do we make that count? That's what we'll get into here. But you use an online presence to share important information. You use it to clarify your vision, share your goals with others. Sometimes it is a way for you to sell services and packages. What do you have to offer people? Sometimes you can sell directly to them as a result of an effective online presence and strategy. You can showcase results, highlight success stories that your organization has been a part of. But most importantly, online presence is essential for storytelling. And as you mentioned moments before, story branding is really the way that we go about branding. And it's really a simple version of marketing. It takes away a lot of the business jargon. It takes away a lot of the data and the results that people typically associate with marketing. And it really gets down to the heart of what your organization is, which is telling a story. And so your organization inherently has a story to tell, whatever that story is. Maybe you help feed homeless. Maybe you work with people incarcerated to help them, with things that they may be dealing with. Whatever your organization does, that is your story. And so your online presence really needs to be telling that story. It used to be even 5 years ago where just having your website was enough. And frankly, it's really not anymore. You see a lot of outdated websites now, and they don't really have a purpose. They don't really share a vision. They don't share a story. And if they're not sharing a story, they're not going to engage with the people you're trying to engage with. And so that's really what we're talking about with an effective website, is sharing that story and then using that story you're sharing to bring people in, to engage. And we do this many ways. I mean, a simple question to ask for yourself right now is, does your website have a donation button? A simple thing like that is a huge part of what we're hoping you should be accomplishing moving forward, especially fundraising right now is a really tough sell. It's a really tough go. So does your organization have a donation button on your homepage? Do you have a subscribe button on your homepage for people to subscribe to newsletters where you can email updates and share important information with them, highlight success stories? Again, those are all ways that you want to start looking at your website. It's not a destination. That's not what a website is anymore. It used to be. It used to be you searched an address in your search bar and you went there and that was it. But it's not a destination anymore. It is your launching point. And so that's really what we need to start looking at when we're talking about online presence.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you a question right in here at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I think probably all of us have some sort of web presence. Probably a good majority of people are doing some sort of social media. Maybe it's a Facebook page, or maybe sending out even an e-newsletter. I know some, even on this call, I receive information updates from them different ways. I guess we sometimes think of these things as separate components. I have a website. I post something on Facebook. I send out an e-newsletter or a physical newsletter. If I understand right, what you're trying to say is all of these things kind of integrate together. Is that some of what you're trying to tell us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a better way of maybe even using the word online presence is to replace the presence part of it with intent, online intent. And so, yes, all of those components should be working together. Your social media should be pointing people to your website. Your website should be pointing people to an email list where you're sharing updates weekly with others. Your Zoom calls should be pointing back to your website, or at least sharing some sort of information that will point to another online component of your organization. So yes, absolutely. It all works together, and your website is your hub, but it's not going to do anything on its own. So yes, absolutely, work all of that together. So if you go ahead.
So another question, and try not to disrupt you by how we're approaching, but you're just making me think about things. What's more important, or maybe you'll come to this a little bit later, to have a huge email list or to have a number of followers on social media? Are they equally important?
So you'll get different answers depending on who you ask. I personally, my company's philosophy is that social media is a small component. I know it's really easy because it's free and everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on Instagram. I know it's really easy to really use that as your primary source of communicating online. But in my opinion, and research shows this as well, it's really a small component. You want your social media to be driving people to your website. That's where you can really have the most impact. So sure, share through social media, share events, share updates, share news. But don't let that be if that is your only online presence, you're missing out on the bigger opportunity. Absolutely.
All right. I'm done interrupting for a few minutes. Go ahead and take us on.
Sure. So we've talked about online presence is not only your new front door, it should be moving forward, even when we're not dealing with pandemic, when everybody's home and online. It should be a really strong focal point of any organization moving forward. It's not, yes, things might go back to somewhat the way they were before, of course, but how many more people are you reaching online than you could in person? And the answer is exponential. There's no limit to that if you use it effectively. And so I do see your questions, and so we'll get those, I think, at the end. So thank you. Are you visually branding your online presence? That's a big component of it as well. So if you think about what does your branding look like for your organization, you have a logo, you have maybe some color schemes picked out. Does your online presence even match that? Does it look like? Do you go to SimonCross.com and see something that looks like Simon Cross, or do you see something that looks generic or outdated or not really representative of who they are as an organization, as a business? And so that's what you really want to start asking yourself is, what first impression are you leaving? Are they coming to an outdated site? Are they coming to a site that has no purpose? And there's a lot of websites out there that do have no purpose. If you're not driving an action, if you're not driving somebody to subscribe to something, if you're not offering them a free newsletter or a free ebook or a free giveaway, if you're not accepting donations through your website, if you're not sharing video messages if needed, if you're not doing any of those things, then what is the point of your website? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, is what is the point of your website? And so the goal of all of this, I think, would be to leave you with one gigantic point here, the intent. What is the intent? Why are you doing this? What's the purpose? And that's really the question you should be asking yourself over and over and over again when you're doing something online. If you're posting something to your social media accounts, what purpose does that serve? Is it sharing your story? Is it helping you reach your goals? If it's not, maybe don't post. There's a lot to be said for talking online when you have something to say. And there's going to be times where you don't have anything to say, and that's okay. It's better to hang tight until you do have news to share or a story to tell than to post something that people are just going to mindlessly scroll past. And that's a big part of it too. I know it's really popular nowadays to have on social media what you call a posting schedule. On Tuesday we post this, and on Thursday we post this. And if I'm not saying that's not effective. Yes, there's a place for that, but be intentional with it. If you're just posting because it's Tuesday and that's what you do on Tuesdays, maybe don't. Maybe don't. Maybe reevaluate your strategies there and ask why are you doing that? Is it really bringing the engagement you want? Sure, a like is great. A like is great. Yeah, that means somebody's interacting with you. I'm not saying it doesn't have its merits, but what is that like actually doing for your organization if it's not driving them to another action? So I think that's really, when we talk about all of these components working together, that's a great example of your social media. It should always be working together with your website or with your e-newsletter or with some sort of event you're promoting.
So why don't we take a pause here? We want to provide the opportunity for you to ask questions, and you can do it one of two ways. We're happy to let you unmute your mic and ask a question right now. If you'd rather, you can put it in the chat, and we'll come around to the chat later on. But as Chris has been unpacking stuff for us, any question come up right now that you'd like to ask, we'll take this pause for right now. Okay. All right. So, Chris, one of the things that you, as you and I were discussing this before you came on, is we all have in our minds certain images, and you're helping us to get maybe a little better perspective on an image of online presence. But, you know, these are all nonprofit leaders. So I don't know any of you that have huge marketing departments. If you do, good for you. We're happy for you. I'm not sure a lot of you have expensive video and camera equipment. You can just see the backdrops of all of us that are on here. You know, we're all in home offices or kitchens or living rooms or wherever we can find ourselves. So we're working with limited budgets, limited resources as far as personnel and so forth. And one of the things that we were talking about is, you know, we have certain myths about what online is, and kind of expound on that a little bit for us. And then I see we got a couple chat questions. We'll get to those after Chris just talks a little bit about maybe myths or misconceptions we might have. Yeah,
great point. There's a lot of myths. And like I said, you can ask a dozen people and get a dozen different answers about some of these things. I prefer not to work so much with trends, but more with what actually is proven to work. And so there are a lot of myths. And I think a primary myth that you may have probably noticed if you're just going on to your favorite websites, whatever, if it's a news website or a sport, whatever's the websites you check out every day. One of the main myths that has been busted drastically over the last 6 months or so is, do you need video? And the answer is probably not. You know, there was a huge push in media and on websites to have video incorporated, but don't worry about video. That's something that you're probably going to have to spend more money on than other avenues, and it's not going to really pay off the way you want it to anyway. So it's money not well spent. It doesn't really drive much engagement. Most of the time, people aren't watching those videos, believe it or not. So that's one of the myths right there that I want to bust. Your website does not need video. If you have it, fine, that's great, but don't spend money on video at all. Don't try to do it on your own unless you know what you're doing. It's one of those things that's really easy to mess up and hard to execute properly. So that's one of the big myths. But the other one is a really simple way to drive engagement, but also to kind of maybe develop your own sense of authority in your specific field is blogging. You know, blogging was really popular 5 years ago, really popular. Everybody had a blog. And nowadays you don't see as much blogging, but it's still an essential part of most successful organizations' online strategies. And a blog doesn't have to be something that you're writing every day. It doesn't have to be something you're writing even every week, but maybe once a month or twice a month, you share a really helpful blog about something that might be relevant to your community. Who are the people you're serving? Share something via a blog on your website and your social media feeds and whatnot. And that's really still an effective tool, not only for you bringing engagement, but also for your developing an online presence. The more blogs you have under your organization's name, the more likely your organization will show up in an online search. If somebody's going to Google and looking up homeless outreach programs, well, if you're an organization who has been really active online and really developing an online presence and really blogging, and there's a lot of search results, you're going to be at the top of that list when they search homeless outreach organizations. So really think strongly about blogging. I know it's not as popular and trendy as it once was, but it's still proven to be very effective, especially in the nonprofit sector, by the way. So that's another myth.
And let me ask a quick question. What's a good length for a blog? Are we writing, a paragraph? Are we writing, 5 pages? Give us some thoughts there.
Yeah, good question. So a better way to look at blogs is it's not a personal essay. It's not you sharing, this happened to us this week. It's sharing helpful information. And so look at blogging as almost writing an article. And so ideal length would be close to 1,000 words. 750 to 1,000 words would be really, really strong for blogging. And like I said, this is something you could do once a month, twice a month. Just develop a strategy. Whatever it is, develop a strategy and stick to it. If you're going to send a blog out, post a new blog the second Friday of every month, then stick to that. But make sure it's something informational, not a personal anecdote, but something that really offers some meat to your audience.
Okay, why don't we got a couple of questions about blogs. I'm just
okay.
So Gary, so the blog should be more instructional than just sharing what your organization is doing?
Absolutely, Gary. Yes. So it's not to say that you shouldn't share personal stories that your organization has been a part of in those blogs, but tie it to, like you said, an instruction or some information that's useful for anybody seeking your organization out, for your target. And remember, always, who is your target audience? That's the question to always ask before you blog. And your target audience should be the people you're hoping to reach and or the donors you're hoping to bring in. One of those two segments. So yeah, share a story, but tie that into some important information. Share some statistics about what your organization does and the impact it has in the real world. Those types of things. Helpful strategies, helpful tips that anybody can apply at home. Those are all really great blog topics.
Okay, and I think you answered John's question, what are key things to put in a blog? So another question, how do we get this blog out? We don't, not enough room in a social media post to put, a 750 to 1,000, blog. Do we send it out as an email? Do we put it on our website? What are some thoughts there?
My answer to that question would be as many avenues as possible. So share it on your website. Absolutely. If you don't have a blog page for your website, it's really easy to implement. And I would encourage you to do that and start just developing a blog library on your site. But in doing so, then you can share the link to that through social media. So you may not be able to post the entire 1,000-word blog post or article onto your social media, but you can post a link to it. That'll link back, again, it will link back to your website and you'll get people visiting there and hopefully making more action. But also absolutely through email. Sure, definitely send it through email if nothing else. I mean, if that's your only avenue, then yeah, then that works fine.
And then would you take like maybe a little sentence or two and make that a social media post, or is that not a good thing?
No, that's a great thing. So always look at what we call tags, which are basically just really catchy, small blurbs, maybe 6 to 10 words or shorter. But always think about what a tag could be. And that tag is really going to be just a really quick way for you to just highlight the main point of what you're about to share so that hopefully people will click. 10 tips for this, 10 tips for reaching your community. People are going to click on that. But if you just posted the article and didn't really have anything catchy, people might not know what that's about.
Okay, now let's kind of shift a little bit, and because we've touched on website couple ways here. We've said we don't necessarily need to have a lot of video on website. We talked about having a donate button. We've just said now that a blog post could be part of a web page. So walk us through a little bit what you look at, as you put together a website, what are the key components of a good website? How do we even know if our website is good or is not measuring up? And are there some are there some ways at a website that can be developed? Because again, as nonprofit leaders, not necessarily having, huge tech and marketing teams is the type of thing that one of us or even a staff person, if we had it, or a volunteer could kind of help maintain for us? Or do we have to always rely on a professional that would be a cost every time we want to make a change or an addition?
That's a great question. And going back to what you said earlier, obviously nonprofit organizations, I've worked in the nonprofit field for quite a few years in my past, so I know how it goes. You wear a million different hats. You don't have the budget to have a marketing team or even a web guy. And so, yeah, you can do this yourself. This is something I really would stress to all of you, is it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to build effective online presence. Now, you ideally will probably spend some money on an initial website if you don't know how to design one yourself. But you don't have to drop thousands and thousands of dollars on one. I want to make that very clear. You can get a very effective website for way under $2,000 if you are effective and intentional about what you're looking for. And those components, they don't have to be complex. There's really three key things you need on a web page. And this is really, if this is all you have on your website, it's going to be more than adequate.
So make a note right now. He's going to tell you the key three things.
Make a homepage, a landing page, which should really just share a brief snapshot of what you do. What is your organization? What does it exist to do? Who are you reaching? If that's all you have on your landing page, that's enough. Now you can add more, but that's all you really need. The second thing you want is a services page. Offer your services. So if you don't offer specific services, then maybe offer a page that links to kind of what you do, what your work is, an explanation of all those different things that you have to offer, a product, a service. So that would be the second thing. And the third thing is just a story, which in older terms we used to call it the About Us page. But have something that shares your story, who you are, who your team is, because you always want to put faces behind your organization. The more you can, the more you humanize your organization, and the more people are going to want to engage with you if they know, oh, I've seen this guy's face, or I've seen her face now, and I know what she does, and I know what her organization does. It's just a warmer experience, and you're going to have higher success if you really share your story and your vision.
So
those three things right there will get you going wherever you need on a web page.
So Chris, let me ask a question. One of the things I've learning about millennials is they will probably pick up their phone for about everything rather than go to a desktop or even a laptop. Yeah. So are there some websites that work better on a smaller device like a phone? And is that something we should be keeping in mind as we think about our website? Should we actually try to access our website on a phone and see how it looks? And that might be also an indicator it's time to update a website.
Yes. So I'll give you two really helpful website builders that you can actually sign up for free. It won't have your domain name attached. If you want to do that, you'll have to pay them per month. But Wix or WordPress, either of those two, and those are really the two standards in websites anyways these days, unless you're getting something completely custom built by somebody who does all the coding from scratch, which costs tens of thousands of dollars. Anybody who you pay for to design a website is probably designing it through one of those two anyways. And so those two are already optimized for mobile viewing. So if you build your website or you host your website through either of those two platforms, it's already mobilely optimized, so you can look at it on any phone and any tablet, and it's going to look good. Now, if you have an older website right now, one of the things in your free time is take a look at it on your tablet or your phone, and how does it look? Are there things that are cut off? Are there important sections that you're completely missing? And oftentimes it is for older websites. So I really encourage you to look at that and ask yourself that, because people are engaging on phones and tablets. That's absolutely at least 50% of your web traffic these days.
Okay, great. Any questions right now on any of you as we're talking about websites? Okay. And under chat, I spelled out Wix and WordPress for you so
Yes.
that you can find information on both of those. With either one of those,
Yeah.
um, we some of us know enough that we talk about term programmers. You have programmers for doing websites, and of course a lot of other things that have to do with software. Uh, do you have to have programming experience to do either one of these, or do you just need to be somewhat tech savvy? What would be your take on that?
You can, if you're tech savvy, you can on your own. It will take some time because you may not be used to it. But if you're tech savvy enough, you can probably build your own website through either of these without much programming knowledge beforehand. They do have some helpful tools that make design easier for people who aren't developers. So yes, yeah, you can absolutely do this on your own. I always strongly encourage people to at least entertain the idea of paying for a basic website if they don't have one. But after you pay for that, I wouldn't see a need for most organizations to have a need to pay somebody each month to maintain that. It's easily something that any of you can do with a little bit of time and reading.
And let me just interject here too for those who are on this call, because we've developed a website, we've worked through a number of things. There are expensive options and there are less expensive options. You want the less expensive options to have the quality perhaps of the expensive options without the price. So one of the things that we've learned, and this is where sometimes having somebody who has a little bit of marketing knowledge is worth spending a little bit of money because it might save you money. But we realized that we were spending about twice as much each month on our web hosting than we needed to be spending. And so when you figure the savings on that on month by month over the course of a year, we literally have saved ourselves, probably $300 or $400 somewhere in there on our hosting fees. So there are some things to keep in mind when you kind of go down this road.
Yes, absolutely. Again, it doesn't have to cost a lot. You don't need a dedicated person. I see your question, John. So how often should you update it? That's a good question. So how often should you update your website? Anytime there's a change. If you're offering a new event, if there's a new fundraising campaign you're about to take part in, if you're anytime you write a blog, anytime you send out a newsletter. So it's really anytime anything changes for you online, your website should change online to meet that. So if there's a new blog, update your website. If there's a new fundraiser, update your website.
And then another thing, Chris, in line to updating, how about revisions, kind of giving a fresh makeover? Is there some thoughts on how often that should happen?
My thoughts are personally, it shouldn't happen too often. Now, there's some organizations, some big businesses, some mega corporations that change the look of their website almost annually. My personal assessment is that is overkill unless you're an Apple or a Google or somebody like that. You want to keep a familiar image. You want to keep a familiar look. So change some of the content. Maybe your story has changed. Maybe your focus on what your organization does has changed. But the layout and look of your website shouldn't really change much. You want to keep that uniform branded look.
So if you've had a website that was developed, say 4 or 5 or even more years ago, that's probably due for revision. But you don't need to worry about it. Boy, it's been a year and a half. Do I need to do it right now?
Yeah, I would say for facelifts, I think that's the word we would probably use is a facelift for your website is probably a good thing to look at every maybe couple of years. But again, that overall layout shouldn't change much. But you do want to incorporate, there is new additions every month even to the WordPress and the Wix worlds that you might want to incorporate into your website. Maybe you want to start booking things on your website. Those are all things that you should be looking at constantly. I guess really the question to ask before you make a change to your website is what purpose is that change serving? And if the purpose is better engagement more donations coming in, sharing your story in a more effective way, then of course, absolutely do it. But if the answer to that question is, well, we just got bored or we were tired of it, maybe just hold off then.
Okay. Well, we're going to come to an end. I want to get opportunity. Any last questions? So we'll look at, here we go. How long do folks actually stay on a website these days? Everything is so fast now these days. Good question.
Very good question.
What's an average good website visit?
So they say you have roughly 6 seconds to catch somebody's attention when they land on your website. And that's why going back to that homepage that we talked about is so important. That is, if you don't get to say anything else to anybody ever again about your organization, those 6 seconds are going to tell them all they'll remember about your organization. And so on your homepage, yeah, you want to share your story as quickly as possible, who you are, what you do, as few words as possible, so they're not having to read paragraph after paragraph to get to the gist of it. But also any actions that you want to drive on that site, a donation button right there, a download now button right there, whatever it is, something that they can do right then and there in those 6 seconds would be ideal. Because if you're driving that kind of engagement on your homepage, then that 6 seconds becomes 60 seconds. And they're registering for your newsletter, and they're reading about who your team is. And so really 6 seconds in a nutshell can turn to 60 seconds very easily if you're effective with your homepage.
All right.
Hey, Chris, I didn't know how to write this. This is kind of a long question.
Sure.
So I hear a lot of churches and other nonprofits saying, hey, we had X thousand people sign on the other day. How long do they have to be on before it registers as a sign-on point?
That's a great question. So the answer is 1 second. If you've logged on, so if you see for example, a Facebook Live, everybody's using Facebook Live right now for churches and meetings and things. If you click on that for a second, that counts as a view, and so that's an engagement right there. So those numbers can often be misleading because you don't know if those people are sticking around for the entirety of it. And so really, even with your online social media videos, drive an action within the first minute, because they may not be checking out the next 5. So ask them to do something, point them to your website, ask them to sign up for your newsletter, ask them for donations for your fundraisers, whatever it is, point that out at the beginning as quickly as possible, because they may not stick around until you ask for that later.
All right, Chris, we're going to kind of wind down. Normally, if you were to offer, for example, services of Wood and Bridge Media in this area, what would you charge a nonprofit?
So what I charge, and so websites are something that we do more as a branding tool. It's part of like our bigger branding services, which is our main focus. But we do website builds, and typically we would charge our clients, depending on what they're looking for, $1,500 to $2,000 for that. Okay. Because there is time and design knowledge that needs to go into that to make it effective. I did share this with both John and Frank, but I will offer a discount for anybody through this webinar who wants those services. We will do that for a $500 fee solely for those of you in this, if that's something you need. So
okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to send out this video to everybody who registered. You'll be able to see this, and we'll send out Chris's contact information. We want to help you because we know that the online presence is not going to go away. It's still going to be a critical piece of who you are. We know that stay at home is going to come to an end, but social distancing probably will be the norm for a number of months, and it may eliminate the opportunities for large crowded gatherings such as fundraisers and so forth where you can interact with the community, but it's still, we got to find ways to interact. And so we want you to be fully engaged. This is this time is a make or break time for many nonprofits, and we want you to succeed. And it's possible to succeed, but it's going to look differently than it did before. The services that you render, you're still going to have those of you who do, housing for people, those of you who are helping ex-offenders or those being sex trafficked, or any of a number of programs. You're going to keep doing those things, but how you communicate that to your donor base, how you get the word out to your community, that's going to all look different. And so online is going to be a key part of it. So we thank you for that. We will be doing this again in 2 weeks. John Hughes, grant writing specialist. John has helped generate about $100 million in grants over the years. And that is our next one. We're really excited about it because as we're all concerned about how our sources of funding during this time, believe it or not, you can still get grants. Grants are still being written. They're still being accepted by a number of funders, both government and foundation. And we've seen some nonprofits that are actually stepping up right now and are going after more grants because they realize how critical it is. John's going to walk you through everything you need to know about grants next time. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.